What's up, gamers? It's your boy, JKon. Welcome to another episode of Rostermania. In the last episode, we covered a lot of moves that happened in EMEA, so in this episode, we'll be finishing off the rest of the region as rosters have pretty much solidified going into the 2024 season. But before we get into the video, I just wanted to take a quick second just to say thank you to each and every one of you. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to watch my videos. It means the world to me that somebody is willing to sit down and just listen to something that I want to talk about. 2023 was a pretty tough year for me, but honestly, having each and every one of you in this community has made it a lot better. Thank you to everybody who has left a comment or has reached out to me. You have honestly made my year significantly better, and I would not be here without you. Heading into a new year, I have a ton of ideas, so I hope that I can continue to keep providing the quality content that all of you guys will enjoy. We've just hit 1,000 subscribers, and I know that doesn't seem much in the grand scheme of things of YouTube, especially with numbers on YouTube being so incredibly inflated, but honestly, 1,000 subscribers means so much to me. It's crazy to me that there's almost 1,000 people out there that are willing to just listen to me, let alone come back to listen to me, and that's just such a gratifying feeling as a creator, and I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you. Now, without further delay, let's get into it. Let's start out with a fan favorite IGL, Redgar, as he has left Team Liquid and has found a new home with Giant, now known as GIANTX, replacing Rhyme as the team's IGL. Let's talk about GIANTX, who I will just refer to as Giants for simplicity's sake, which is an esports entity agreement that is combining Giants Gaming and Excel Esports to compete in both the LEC and EMEA VCT. This comes after Riot's recent rule changes following organizations to partner with one another, as well as set up an affiliate team with the challenger roster to form two-way players. Another merge entity that we'll be seeing in VCT is between Detonation Focus Me and Crazy Raccoon, but we'll get to them in another video. Giants and Excel both have had rosters within Valorant and League of Legends throughout the years, with each of them holding a franchise slot in one of the leagues, so it makes sense for them to combine forces going forward. Giants have been able to retain everybody from their 2023 roster sans Rhyme, as he has decided to retire from the game and pursue his education, which is a big shame as EMEA has a shallow pool of good IGLs, and I thought he was pretty good, and he improved a lot over the year as he developed as an in-game leader. Like I mentioned earlier, Redgar has come in and taken his place as the captain for the squad. I don't think this is the worst move overall, as like I said, there aren't a ton of good IGLs out there, but Redgar did have a bit of a poor 2023. Before we get into Redgar's year on Liquid, let's talk about Giants and how their past year went. Giants have been a large name in the Valorant scene for quite a while, signing their first roster back in 2021, featuring Hoodie, who has returned after a stint on G2, Pipson, now the coach of GIANTX, who returned with Hoodie from G2, Meadow, a Sentinel staple of EMEA, Boo, the now IGL of Team Heretics, and Happy, who is now the coach of M80 and was a legendary French Counter-Strike in-game leader. Giants would go through many roster changes over the years as they competed in EU Challengers and in the regional leagues. They were accepted into the VCT Franchise League for 2023 and would enter the year with the roster of Nookie, Cloud, Rhyme, Hoodie, and Fitinho with coach Pipson. Giants would carve out an identity for being a very consistent team throughout the year as they finished in 4th place, going 5-4 in the regular season, qualifying for playoffs. Unfortunately, their playoff run was very short as they got 2-0'd by Foot in their opener and 2-0'd by Na'Vi in the lower bracket, sending them to LCQ. Fortunately for Giants and Na'Vi especially, because Fnatic were able to win both Lock-In and Masters Tokyo, EMEA was gifted with 2 extra slots for champions. Giants did not take this lightly as they rolled through their competition in LCQ, taking the event without dropping a map. They 2-0'd Karmine, Core, and Koi, and 3-0'd Na'Vi in the grand finals. Although the grand finals did not mean too much, it did give Giants EMEA's 4th seed at champions. Giants would be placed in Group A and they would have a decent showing, but unfortunately they would lose their opening matchup against Edward Gaming, pushing the series to 3 maps, but Fitinho's heroics were not enough to overcome the Chinese side. They would go on to face Crew for elimination and were able to stave off the LATAM squad, 2-0ing them, but both maps were quite close, with Pearl going to overtime. Giants would once again face off against their Chinese rivals who were seeking to shut down the EMEA team as they claimed that EDG were a bit overrated. And shut them down they did as EDG were able to best their previous matchup, taking down Giants 2-0 and only giving up 13 rounds across the series, ending the EMEA squad's year. And that leads us to where we are today, where Giants are running it back for 2024, with the only change being the aforementioned Redgar signing. To be honest, I'm not sure who else they could have gotten that would fit as an IGL, and I still think that Redgar has a lot in the tank. Yes, he has his int moments and is more than willing to throw himself forward, especially with Omen, but he still has good calls and game plans. I don't think it's necessarily fair to put all of Liquid's problems on him, as they did seem to not gel completely well, and they did have a lot of conflicting approaches to the game, which led to them not having as much success as they could have. Giants were known for their consistency, and I don't know if I can chalk that all up to just Rhymes calling, as I thought that Cloud was an absolute superstar throughout the year. Also, Nookie put up pretty solid numbers despite having a quieter year comparatively to his previous years. It's hard to say that this move will push Giants into a contender, but they still can be an upper half team in the region. I would expect Cloud to continue to be excellent, but again, this seems to be a middle of the pack roster for me, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Let's move on to talk about Redgar's previous team, as Liquid have rebuilt their squad heading into 2024. Only Nats and Yampi remain from their 2023 squad, as Safe, Soulcast, and the aforementioned Redgar have departed their roster after a disappointing year. When the 2023 Liquid roster debuted at Lock-In, they were absolutely horrendous, as they looked like one of the worst teams at the event and looked completely uncoordinated as they got blown out 2-0 by Team Secret. TL were able to bounce back throughout the regular season and were able to end top 3, going 6-3 and qualifying for playoffs. There, they were able to go on a run, taking down Team Vitality 2-1 in their opening matchup and taking down Na'Vi in a highly contested 2-0. They would go on to face Fnatic in the upper finals, but would lose 2-0 off the back of a Durko masterclass, who really put his team on his back as he carried them over the line on Lotus. TL will go down to the lower final and face off against Foot Esports, who they pretty easily 3-0'd outside of Lotus, which went to quadruple overtime. Liquid would get a rematch against Fnatic in the grand finals, and this time will come out on top, taking the series 3-1 and handing Fnatic their first loss of the year, as they were able to claim the inaugural VCT EMEA trophy. Liquid were auto-qualified to the playoffs of Masters Tokyo and were able to take their opening matchup against EDG 2-1. They then faced Evil Geniuses, who absolutely dominated them, only ceding 11 rounds in a swift 2-0, with Redgar and Soulcast really struggling in the series. Liquid would then take on NRG in the lower bracket, but would get eliminated 2-1, with TL basically playing 4v5, as Redgar once again had a very poor series, going 23-48-28 with 111 ACS, as his team would be eliminated in 5th-6th place. Their champions run wasn't any better, as they were unable to escape groups, although they were put in the group of death. They would lose 2-0 in an incredibly close series to Na'Vi, who took Fracture in the 24th round 13-11 and won Bind 17-50 in quadruple overtime. TL's next matchup against Loud wasn't as inspiring, as they got absolutely clapped by the Brazilian side, as they were only able to claim 10 rounds across the 2-map series, as their year would end there and they would look for a rebuild for 2024. And that leads us to where we are today, where TL has dropped 3 members from their 2023 roster, only retaining Nats and Yampi as well as their coach Emil, with the core of Apeks 2023 roster being brought in to take the open vacancies. TL would sign Kiko as their duelist, Mystic as their controller, and Enzo as their initiator in IGL. Apeks had a very dominant 2023, competing in the Polaris League and having an almost flawless year, only dropping 2 series in the entire year. Unfortunately, one of them was the grand finals of Ascension to Gentle Mates, who have claimed a spot in the Tier 1 League. Apeks went 25-2 in series and were an absolute force throughout the year, and should have honestly taken their spot in the Tier 1 League, because all of their players are Tier 1 quality and were some of the best in their individual roles. Fortunately for the players themselves, everyone has been picked up to play in VCT next year. We got to see this new Liquid team in action as they debuted at the Africa TV Valorant League event earlier in December. They looked pretty good for their debut, as they were able to show off on stage a little, as well as show that they have a lot of potential. I like some of the calls that Enzo was making, and Kiko looks pretty good out there for a rookie. Yeah, I know it's a third-party event, but hey, stage time is better than not, especially with how compact the schedule is coming up this year. If you like a bit more coverage at the AVL event, go check out my video that I made on it after this one. It'll be linked in the description down below. Overall, this Liquid rebuild doesn't look too bad, and with how in flux EMEA might be coming into 2024, they can definitely vie for that second slot in the region. Enzo is a pretty good IGL, and I would rate him in the upper end of the pool from EMEA. Mystic should have been in franchising from the beginning in my opinion, so I'm glad to see him finally there. Yampi is always the X factor, and if he can keep up form, this team can be extremely dangerous. Kiko, being a young gun, has a lot of potential, and we all know how I feel about young talents. And last but not least, we have Nats, who is still one of my favorite favorite players of all time to root for, and he is still a top Sentinel talent that I think had an underrated year, and people have forgotten how good he is. Hopefully this team will be able to click together and have good chemistry going into the new year. Speaking of ex-Apeks members, Shadow has found his way back into the upper echelon of EMEA competition as he has joined Koi along with Kamo for 2024. Koi had a very turbulent 2023 and honestly was a big disappointment in my opinion as a fan of some of the players that they had on the roster. Koi would bring in Trex of Guild fame, Shadows from the legendary Gambit/Mech, Starzo, a world champion with Ascend, Wolfen, a young tier 2 talent from Kase Esports, and Koldamenta, an experienced IGL known for his time on Ascend, G2, and Guild. This was a stacked roster in terms of talent that unfortunately did not gel well together and suffered from role issues, giving us nothing but disappointment. Koi would open up 2023 at Lock-In with a 0-2 matchup against NRG, where Trex would put on his best LeBron James cosplay, being the best player on the server and putting up 46, 27, and 9 with 275 ACS, despite the loss. Koi would at least start the regular season with a bang, winning the regular season opener against Na'Vi 2-0 with Shadows going absolutely nuclear, putting up 63, 31, 22 with 293 ACS. Ascent was all him as he backpacked his entire squad, especially on the defensive half where he got 18 out of his 27 kills. On Lotus, it was an absolute slugfest that went to septuple overtime with both squads posting a 9-3 defensive half, with Na'Vi on the receiving end of the curse. Unfortunately for Koi, it was pretty much all downhill from there as they would proceed to lose 7 of their remaining 8 regular season matches, with 6 of those L's being in a row. What's even worse is that outside of their 2-1 victory against Team Heretics in week 7, the squad only won 3 maps in that time span. They would enter LCQ in the knockout round and would once again take a 2-1 victory over Team Heretics. They would then face Na'Vi in the upper semifinals, and just like the regular season matchup, they would 2-0 them, but this time in absolute style as they only ceded 9 rounds to the yellow and black. Unfortunately for them, that was their last map win of the year as they would proceed to get 2-0'd by Giants in the upper finals and 3-0'd by Na'Vi in the lower finals, but they at least put up a decent fight in both of these series as they only got blown out in one of the 5 maps. I also find it really funny that the only wins that they got throughout the year were against the same teams with the same map scores, but the script leaking a little bit is bound to happen. Koi really couldn't get it together with all of their talent, and they had a lot of people out of role and had constant role swaps to try to alleviate this. They had too many flex initiated players that could play other roles, but most of the time they were slotted in their weaker ones. Wolfen also underperformed throughout the year and was one of the worst duelists in his region. This was not aided by the fact that Koi were pretty much playing 4v5 every match, as Koldamenta was the anchor that every great cruise ship aspires to own, as he kept his team rooted at the bottom of the region. He was one of, if not the worst performing player in Tier 1 EMEA across a large sample size of maps. It's unfortunate that he fell off as he did have a lot of great moments leading previous rosters to success, most notably that Guild roster that had insane talent on it that probably carried him most of the time. And that leads us to where we are today, where Koi are looking to retool their roster coming into 2024. We'll start with the aforementioned Shadow, a Swedish Flash Initiator main that has been an EMEA staple since the beginning of Valorant, previously playing for Fabricant, FunPlus Phoenix, Team Vitality, and Giants. He has been playing in Tier 2 EMEA since his time on FPX, where he was part of the original Party Parrot squad that got picked up by the Chinese organization back in 2020. Shadow has always been a pretty solid initiator player that has a lot of experience, so him joining Apeks for 2023 helped give that team stability as they were a powerhouse throughout the year and dominated. He's definitely a name that fell out of view in the mainstream for a while, so him coming back to the Tier 1 league and being able to show off his skills and improvements is nice to see. He proved himself worthy of being a Tier 1 player while a part of Apeks, and he put up pretty solid numbers throughout the year, although he would probably be considered that roster's weakest link. He may not be Koi's savior coming into the new year, but he can definitely provide some stability and veteran leadership. Moving on to their other main roster signing, Koi have brought in Kamo, a young cracked Polish duelist main who broke into the scene in 2022 playing for NAM Esports and Desire. In 2023, he would join GTZ Esports and play in the Portuguese Challengers League, where he would put up absolute numbers, being the highest rated player in Split 1 and being a top 5 player in Split 2. Despite superstar showings from the young Pole, his team would end both splits in second place to Portugal's own Saw and his rival duelist Tamazi, whom they could never overcome in playoffs. Despite these shortcomings, Kamo was able to drag his team to these deep playoff runs as he was an absolute playoff riser, and I think that's going to be something to look out for. When the time came and he was needed to put up numbers, my man truly put up numbers. In the upper final of Split 1 against Saw, he was the best player in the server, putting up 57, 51, and 22 with 270 ACS, despite Saw winning 2-1 and everyone on their team ending the series positive. In the lower final against EGN Esports, he went nuclear, dropping 95, 58, and 19 with 334 ACS, as his team took the series 3-1 with the next highest fragger on his team having 69 kills. Nice! In the grand finals against Saw, Kamo would channel his inner LBJ, as he was the only member of his team with a positive scoreline, as they pretty much got blown out 3-1, putting up 82, 66, and 16 with 215 ACS. The next highest fragger on his team had 45 kills and was a team best -12 compared to the other three. A crazy stat for Kamo was that he went 14-8 in first kills to first deaths in the series, but it was not nearly enough. In the upper final of Split 2 against Saw, another familiar situation appeared, as Kamo was once again the only positive player on his team, as they got blown out 2-0, only claiming 13 rounds. Kamo's output of 34 frags was matched by 4 of Saw's members, and if that's not telling of how this matchup goes, then I don't know what is. The lower final would see a familiar foe, as GTZ would face off against EGN Esports, mimicking Split 1, as they would take the series 3-2, with Kamo dropping 97, 68, and 13 with 286 ACS. And Kamo once again was the only positive player on his team. In the grand finals against Saw, Deja Vu struck again, as Kamo was the only positive member for his team, this time only putting up 51, 50, and 10 with 231 ACS, as his team got obliterated 3-0. Fizzy and Tamazi woke up and chose violence, with the latter going 22 and 7 in first kills to first deaths. Holy shit, that is absolutely absurd. GTZ would then participate in the EMEA Ascension play-ins, where they would top their group 2-0, taking a 13-9 Pearl win over Mouse and a 13-11 Ascent win over S2G Esports. They would unfortunately meet Focus in their semi-final matchup and would lose 2-0, ending their year. Kamo was pretty good during these play-ins and was the second highest rated player overall, but his heroics throughout the year would once again come short, as he was unable to bring his team over the line. Fortunately for him, he has now made a name for himself and is now called up to the big leagues. Kamo definitely has a lot of potential and honestly should have gotten more hype behind his signing. This kid is an obvious talent and should have eyes on him like the other young duelist signings. I think we're getting a real treat this year in EMEA with all of these young talents coming in, and I hope to see Kamo put up big numbers on the big stage. We've gotten to see him in action under the Koi banner, as he and Shadow debuted at the Crossfire Cup. Unfortunately for them, their tournament run only lasted 5 maps, as they went out 2-3 to Kasei Esports. All 5 maps were extremely competitive, but this matchup really ended up being Kamo and friends versus paTiTek and friends, as the former put up 96, 78, and 15 with 235 ACS, and the latter put up 94, 75, and 30 with 219 ACS. Kamo was definitely a bright spot for this roster, and Shadow looks solid with great utility, but the problem lies with the other 3, as they continue to struggle with role identity. The problem with having Shadows and Starzo on the roster is that you still have 2 world-class flash initiators that are playing off-role, with Shadow also playing that same role. Trex was also swapping roles and agents every map, but his position on this roster might not be available anymore. I mentioned this in my last EMEA Rostermania video, so go check it out if you haven't seen it already, but Trex has been rumored to be leaving this roster and joining Team Vitality in place of Destrian for next year. As a Trex fan, I am so happy to see him free from this mismanaged team, but as an outsider looking at Koi's decision making, it is a bit questionable at times. Trex was by far their best player throughout 2023 and is an amazing talent on Rays and Initiators. That doesn't discount his ability to switch to other roles if needed, so it'll be interesting to see how he will fit in his new team. I think the argument for assembling the most talent together and figuring out roles later can work, but there are obvious downsides to it. Koi's 2023 roster is a perfect example of this, and honestly their 2024 roster kind of says the same. Grabinho will be the replacement for Trex on the starting roster, and to be honest, I can kind of see it. Grabinho is a young Polish player who most recently spent 2023 playing for Anonymous Esports in the Polaris League against Vitality Runners Diamond Esports, Benji Fishy's Enterprise Esports, and of course, Ascend. He previously played for Team Heretics in 2022, and he's primarily a controller player, but in this most recent year, he has swapped roles many times, playing the Flash Initiator and then the Sentinel role. He put up decent numbers throughout the year, but nothing amazing in my opinion, but he definitely has talent. I think his flexibility overall can help out Koi, as again, they lack role identity. If he takes over the Sentinel role, that can free up Shadows to return to his flex role, which he is very good at. Starzo was rumored to want to play controller for the team, but having Garbino there, he can take over that role or even flex the secondary controller pretty easily. I think this might help iron out some of their role issues, but losing a talent like Trex is a huge cost. Koi are still looking at these players to transition to different roles, and for some teams that might work out, but if they repeat like last year, then it can be a disaster. Overall, I'm not super convinced by this roster coming into the new year. The new talents will be exciting to watch out for, but I don't think they necessarily solve the issues that continued to plague them last year. Yes, they dropped a couple non-fraggers from their roster, but they also lost their best fragger in the process, and I don't know who will be calling for this roster. I think Koi will continue to be a question mark in my book to see if they will be able to figure it out and put it together. Also, something to take note of for Koi as a whole is that their partnership with Rogue has now dissolved, with Rogue maintaining their LEC slot and Koi their VCT slot respectively. This partnership occurred before franchising and is very similar to what GIANTX are doing right now, but with this divorce might come financial issues and a hit to the Koi brand. But to alleviate all of that, Koi, the brand, the organization, and its assets have now been acquired by Overactive Media, a Toronto-based company who are most well known for owning the Toronto Ultra in the Call of Duty League, the Toronto Defiant in the now defunct Overwatch League, Mad Lions in the LEC, and multiple other game titles like Valorant, and of course they originally purchased Splice way back in the day, who were originally rebranded from Follow Esports back in 2015. Fun fact, I was a fan of Follow Esports back in the day because of their logo of FE, which is the element for iron, which I thought was really cool. They also signed the SKDC roster that had the legend Ocean leading it, as well as having a rifler named Hades, who I thought had a sick in-game name, and he used to use this clean AK Vulcan, a skin that I've always been a fan of. Anyways, with Koi being acquired along with Movie Star Writers, the Canadian company adds 2 more Spanish organizations under their umbrella and will have teams operating in multiple different games around the world as they continue to solidify themselves as a dominant force in not only the Spanish and European markets, but also in Latin America. I think this is something that we will continue to see happen a lot in esports as organizations are getting consolidated and absorbed by others. For example, Counterlogic Gaming, a staple from early League of Legends that was initially purchased by the Madison Square Garden Group, is no longer alive as NRG has acquired the brand and all of its assets. Version 1 announced a merger with G2 coming into this year, which gave the European powerhouse a Call of Duty League slot with the Minnesota Rocker, but unfortunately it forced them to release their North American Game Changers team, which got acquired by Shopify Rebellion and who went on to win the Game Changers Champions in 2023. If you want an even bigger throwback, there's the original acquisition of Optic Gaming to Immortals Gaming Club, who owns the Immortals and MIBR brands, but they sold Optic to Envy back in 2021, and Envy has pretty much dissolved at this point, which is a damn shame because they were a legendary organization in many different titles. If you want another example of more recent times, you have GameSquare, which is the parent company of Complexity, purchasing FaZe Clan and all of its assets. Right now, the rumor is that Jason Lake, the original founder of Complexity, is looking to purchase back Complexity from GameSquare so GameSquare can run FaZe Clan and he can run Complexity and keep their Counter-Strike rosters. With many players signing new contracts coming into this new year, I think that is most likely going to happen, so that's a W in my book as both brands get to stay alive. Getting back to the Overactive Media acquisition, one of the worst things that I have to say that comes out of this is their approach to branding for all of their teams. The Toronto ones of course remain the same, but the rest, oh boy, it's rough. Koi's name is basically getting added to the back end of all of their rosters like a cheap bumper sticker. All the teams that were under the Mad Lions banner, for example their League and Valorant rosters, are now Mad Lions Koi, and everything under Movie Star Writers that got acquired, for example their CS2 roster which they just announced, and their Spanish Challenger League of Legends team in the LVP Superliga will be under the Movie Star Koi title. I think this is incredibly convoluted, but they did say that they have a branding overhaul in the future to include all of the new acquisitions, so hopefully it will be better than what they have now. The funny thing to me is that in the LEC last year, Rogue slot was under Koi, and now they will be returning to Rogue like mentioned earlier, but Koi's name will now be tied to another organization in the same league, so hopefully that doesn't get people confused. Moving on to finally round out the Apeks boys, Magnum has returned to the upper echelon of EMEA competition as he has joined the rebuilding Karmine core as their IGO. Magnum, of course, is most well known for his time on Fnatic, joining the European organization along with Durka before Stage 2 of EU Challengers back in April of 2021. After these two were added to the roster, Fnatic went on to become a powerhouse in Europe, making it to Masters Reykjavik and Champions in 2021 and Reykjavik in 2022. Unfortunately, during Magnum's tenure with the roster, Fnatic were unable to lift the trophy despite making it to a few grand finals, most notably losing 3-0 to Sentinels at the first Masters Reykjavik. Magnum would leave the roster and join Koi after bombing out of Reykjavik and would compete with them for the rest of 2022, not finding much success. He would then join his former Fnatic teammates on Apeks for 2023, and we know how their story went. Magnum is still a premier Sentinel player and put up pretty solid numbers throughout the year. He was definitely one of the better players in Tier 2 EMEA and one of the best Sentinel mains there. He has grown a lot as a player since his time on Fnatic, and I think he can surprise a lot of people who haven't seen him in a while. It'll be interesting to see how he will perform as a caller, as I believe this will be the first time that he's been the IGL of a team, but he will have a lot of young guns to guide. Like his Apeks teammates, he more than proved himself to be a Tier 1 player, and I'm happy to see him return to the top. There's something about players that have been in the scene a while that have grinded their way back to the top that just warms my heart, so I hope that he will have success, especially as he helms the rebuild from a pretty disastrous 2023 for Karmine Corp. Karmine Corp's 2023 was pretty much a disaster as the team built their roster around the brother duo of Scream and Nivera with what ended up being pretty subpar pieces, Sa and Shin. They would start out the year with a 2-1 victory over FPX at lock-in, but would go out 0-2 against Loud, with Shin honestly looking really impressive. They would start out the regular season with a 2-0 win over BBL, but it would be all downhill from there. Outside of a 2-1 victory over Koi in week 5, KC would not win a single map for the rest of the regular season, going 0-12 across 6 weeks and 4-13 overall. Granted, they were playing with their assistant coach Zeish, who has been retained as their assistant coach going into 2024 after Nuzera left in the middle of the season. In LCQ, they would look a lot better than they did in the regular season as they took a highly contested series against BBL 2-1. They would go on to face Giants, but would get 2-0 leading to a matchup against Na'Vi, who went 2-1 in favor of Angel and crew, ending their year. The last hurrah from this squad was at the KC X3 event that Karmine Corp held that hosted 28,000 people live, where they would get defeated by the full Korean T1 lineup. Rest in peace, King, he is no longer there. And that leads us to where we are today, where we have a new Magnum-led roster with only Shin and the aforementioned Zeish remaining. Karmine Corp has done a complete rebuild from 2023 and have brought in Tamazi, Martine, an NA import in Narrate, and Coach Aang to round out the roster. Very similar to Team Heretics, Karmine Corp has dropped the old established names and went with a young blood approach, which of course you know I'm a fan of. We'll start out with Tamazi, a Portuguese duelist main who spent this past year playing for SAW, being their superstar player as he led his team to back-to-back dominant split championships in the Portugal Tempest League, absolutely crushing Kamo's dreams of taking home the trophy as they were 10-2 in playoff maps and 4-0 in series against Kamo's GTZ Esports. Tamazi was the absolute standout player from this league as he topped the charts, being the second highest rated player in Split 1, only behind Kamo, putting up a 1.31 rating with 266 ACS. In Split 2, he bested his rival, putting up an absurd 1.42 rating with 285 ACS as he was number 1 across the split. Unfortunately for Tamazi and Sol, although they made it to EMEA Ascensions and into playoffs, they matched up against the grand finalists in back-to-back series, losing 2-0 to Apeks and 2-1 to Gentle Mates to end their year. Tamazi definitely struggled against Apeks, but put up a heroic effort against Gentle Mates, racking up the highest kill count of 50 in the series. Tamazi is the only member from SAW that has been called up to the big leagues, which is a shame as they have a lot of talent on that roster, but you take the best of the best, right? We've gotten to see him debut with this new roster at the Heretics XP show match, where they went against the new team Heretics and Tamazi was on Viper. Karmine Corp are taking a page out of the global esports blue lock theory and signed a lot of cracked duelist mains, so having Tamazi switch over to Viper is not a surprise as one of the three had to switch. The team looked pretty good overall and pretty easily handled the young Heretics as they took Bind 13-7. I know it's just a show match, but come on. It's always cool to see teams in action, especially newly built ones. The real star of the show match has to be Martine, as he absolutely styled on Heretics with his Yoru. If you don't know who Martine is, don't worry, I got your back. He is a Czech duelist main who most recently was a part of GMT Esports and competed in the Italian Challengers League Rinascimento, or Renaissance. He was able to lead his team to a 3rd place finish in the regular season of Split 1, going 8-6 and giving them a playoff berth in the lower bracket. There, they would go on a run as GMT with 3-1 Mako Esports, 3-2 Humble, and 3-1 Desire in the grand finals. Martine would finish the split as the top player in the league, putting up a 1.32 rating with 269 ACS. Split 2 started out much better for GMT as they would top the regular split, going 12-2 and getting the first seed. Unfortunately, they couldn't repeat as champions this time, coming from the upper bracket as they 3-0'd Desire in the upper final, but would be on the receiving end of that same beating as Desire took the trophy 3-0 and a direct slot to the group stage of Ascension. GMT and Martin would go to the Ascension play-in stage, but would not be able to get out of groups, as although each team went 1-1, GMT had a negative round differential and their year would be over, despite Martin continuing to be his team's superstar. He has now been called up to the big stage, and I think he can make quite a statement. He is extremely aggressive as a player, and his aim is quite crispy, so I'm not surprised that KC has decided to keep him as their tip of the spear. Obviously, we don't know the roles 100%, but from the show matches, Yoru looked quite nasty. Like his fellow newcomer duelist, he is definitely a name to keep an eye out for. Speaking of a newcomer duelist, Karmine brought in one of the few and rare North American imports, Narrate. Narrate is a young duelist main who broke onto the North American scene in 2023, where he would join Mad Lions that previously signed the Dark Ratio roster and would compete in the Challengers League in place of Will. Unfortunately for Trick and Co, they were already 0-2 when they brought Narrate in, and that streak would continue as they took back-to-back 0-2 losses from M80 and the Guard, although Narrate did look pretty good and started to put up good numbers. Fortunately for Mad Lions, they would get their first and only win of the split over OR Esports, taking the series 2-1 with Narrate popping off, putting up a 62, 39, and 15 scoreline with 268 ACS. Although he came in late to the split and faced off against two of the best teams and challengers for his debut, Narrate would still place top 10 in rating with a 1.23 rating with 256 ACS. Split 2 went better than Split 1, but not by much at all, with Mad Lions once again only securing one win, this time a 2-1 victory over the Guard. This split they at least won more maps, going 4-9 and ending the split in 10th place, one ahead of Split 1. Narrate would continue to impress, this time being the second highest rated player in the split, having a 1.21 rating with 258 ACS, which is pretty incredible for how weak his team was around him. Mad Lions would then face relegation, but would not have much success as they would lose their opener 2-0 to Turtle Troop, but were able to take a 2-1 win over Disguise to face OR Esports in the decider matchup. Narrate unfortunately could not carry hard enough as his team fell short 2-1 and were relegated from challengers. Narrate was the best player on the server in that series and put up an insane 44-4 with 306 ACS, and would be the second highest rated player in the relegation tournament with a 1.18 rating and 257 ACS. Obviously, Narrate has a ton of talent, and he showcased it in his short time in Tier 2. He was hard carrying his team throughout both splits, and although they were losing a ton, he was still a top tier player nonetheless, and rightfully deserves a shot in Tier 1. Unfortunate for North America as a whole, as he took his talents to Berlin instead, as he has superstar potential, and North American orgs are missing out. He joins this Karmine squad, and I'm not sure if he'll be the main duelist or Martin will be, but either way, he has a ton of potential, and this roster rebuild has some shooters. I'm excited to see how they will continue to come together and perform going into the new year. Last but not least, I want to talk about their new coach, Aang, who is most well known for his time coaching Gambit Esports when they won Masters Berlin in 2021, and when they were known as Mech. He most recently spent 2023 coaching TSM and Challengers, where they had decent success but didn't make many deep runs. In Split 1, they would place third in the regular split, going 4-1 and would qualify for the mid-season face-off. There, they would immediately drop to the lower bracket following a 0-2 loss to Moist Moguls. They would be able to 2-0 DSG, but would vacate the bracket with a 2-1 loss to Oxygen Esports. In Split 2, TSM would struggle, going 2-3 in the regular split and placing 8th, but they would have enough points to qualify for playoffs. It was a pretty short run though, as they once again got 2-0'd by Moist Moguls and would lose 2-1 in an extremely close series to FaZe Clan, ending the year and withdrawing their Valorant division. Aang would be signed to Karmine and would be the mastermind behind putting together the rebuild, and I think he did a pretty good job. Similar to Team Heretics, I think all of these young fraggers can make huge waves if given some time. Keeping two veterans with Shin and Magnum is a good strategy to help mold these new players, and we got to see Shin go back to his comfortable controller role where he continues to look very good. Magnum has seemed to switch to Initiator, so we'll see if these roles stick going into the new year, but overall it's pretty exciting. Aang is a coach that uses a ton of data and pushes his team to grind out scenarios and scrims, so I wouldn't be surprised if this new roster looks very drilled by the end of the year. Karmine looked pretty good at their show match, and I'm honestly more hyped for this roster than I was for their 2023 one. I don't have high expectations for them, but I will look upon them with interest. Let's move on from Kameto's squad and head over to Turkey, as BBL have brought back some familiar faces, as Elite and paTiTek have returned to the Turkish org, as well as paTiTek bringing Riyazi with him from S2G Esports. We'll start with Elite, a Sentinel main who spent this past year on Papara Supermassive, primarily playing Killjoy and Cypher. He played under the BBL banner very briefly back in 2022, but really made his name in one of Turkey's most famous organizations. Supermassive would start out Split 1 going 6-3 in the regular season and placing 3rd and would qualify for playoffs. There they would make it to the grand finals, beating Galatasaray Esports 2-0 and Parla Esports 3-2 along the way. In the finals they would face off against S2G Esports, who would take the trophy 3-0. Elite would perform quite well nonetheless and would be a top 10 rated player in the league, putting up a 1.11 rating and 231 ACS and being the highest rated Sentinel overall. In Split 2 it would almost be deja vu, as Supermassive would go 6-2 and place 3rd once again, but this time their playoff run was not as inspiring, as they would take their opening series 2-1 over Digital Athletics, but then fall 2-1 to S2G Esports and enter the lower bracket. There they would get 2-0'd by Galacticos, ending their year. Despite not making a deep run in playoffs, Elite still ended as a top 10 player of the split, putting up a 1.1 rating and 229 ACS, once again claiming the top Sentinel spot. Elite is definitely a very talented player and shows a lot of potential. He was able to top Yetije on back-to-back ratings, despite Yetije being on a much stronger roster. I think he can help this BBL roster overall, as I think he has a stronger fragger than Turco was, so replacing that aspect can hopefully benefit this roster going forward. Speaking of dropping members, BBL dropped Suchny, who funnily enough was signed to replace Elite on the roster back in 2023. I thought Suchny was pretty good, as he was also calling for that team, but it looks like they weren't impressed, as they have brought back paTiTek to lead the squad. paTiTek is a very experienced Turkish player who is most well known for his time on Team Heretics, where he won First Strike, and Supermassive, where he was able to lead the Turkish squad to Masters Berlin. paTiTek would join BBL for 2022 and would lead the team through Turkey Challengers, eventually qualifying for EMEA Challengers. There they would go 2-3 in the group stage, missing playoffs. In Split 2 they would once again go 2-3, missing playoffs and having to battle an LCQ. Unfortunately for them, they would go winless, as they got 2-0'd by Liquid in the opener and 2-0'd by Guild in the lower bracket, ending their year as paTiTek would vacate the roster and rejoin Heretics for the Crossfire Cup, before eventually making his way to S2G Esports. If you want a breakdown of S2G's year, go watch my part on Team Heretics signing Riens in the previous Rostermania. paTiTek was a bottom half rated player in Split 1, putting up a 0.97 rating with 205 ACS, as he led his team to a split trophy with a 3-0 victory in the grand finals over Supermassive. In Split 2, paTiTek's numbers dropped even further, as he was a bottom 3 player with a minimum 10 maps played, putting up a measly 0.79 rating with 171 ACS, as his team was unable to win back-to-back trophies, as they fell in the grand finals 0-3 to Digital Athletics. To finish out the year at EMEA Ascension play-ins, paTiTek would once again struggle, being a bottom half rated player, putting up a 0.94 rating with 198 ACS, as his team was unable to get over the line, as they fell 3-1 in the grand finals to Focus. As he rejoins BBL, he will carry with him a wealth of knowledge and experience, but I do fear that he may struggle to frag. There's something always funny to me when I see the plus player minus player plus player thing, because it always reminds me of going back to your ex. And I don't know, I think there's always something to be said about moving on. Anywho, he'll be leading the squad and hopefully will produce better results than last year, although I'm not super confident in this signing. To round out this very confusing roster, Riyazi will be joining after his year on S2G. Riyazi is a main initiator player that put up pretty consistent numbers throughout the year and was a big contributor to his team's success. In Split 1, he put up a 1.03 rating with 202 ACS, and in Split 2, he had a slight dip, having a 0.98 rating with 189 ACS. He put up his highest numbers in Ascension play-ins, posting a 1.09 rating with 202 ACS. He looks solid overall, but I don't think he's going to be a world changer. Adding another consistent piece to the pie can't seem to hurt, but this team doesn't look too exciting to me if I'm gonna be real, and I would say Foot definitely have more of my interest than BBL. Also, if you have a thing for feet or BBLs, do your thing, just keep it to yourself. And last but not least, I wanted to waffle a little bit on some moves that I covered with editor's notes in my last video. First, we have paTiTek returning to Team Heretics as their 6th man and will be taking the place of Woot until he is of age to compete. I think that paTiTek is a fine player to have as a 6th man, as he has been in the scene for a really long time, mainly known for being a part of early G2 and Team Heretics. In 2022, he would primarily play for Excel, but after not finding much success, he would jump around from team to team. He most recently got to display his skill playing for Kase Esports at the Crossfire Cup as he went blow for blow with the new coin Kamo, putting up a 94, 75, and 30 scoreline with 219 ACS, primarily playing controller as his team took the series 3-2. Kase unfortunately lost a close 3-2 series to UCAM Esports Club, rumored Koi Grabinho's team at the time, and now Pat has found his way back to Team Heretics. Overall, I think he's still a very skilled player that has a ton of experience within the scene and can be a veteran presence for this roster. I think that will help a lot as Boo is the only older member on the roster currently, so hopefully paTiTek can help develop this roster moving forward. I think it's a great pickup and you can't have really asked much more from a career journeyman. And finally, to round out the video, we had the return of Mini to Fnatic. I kind of had a hunch that this was going to happen as it just seemed unrealistic to break up the Boaster Mini duo. I think Mini is still one of the best minds for Valorant, and even if he doesn't have as large of a voice or presence as he did as the head coach, I still think he has a ton to contribute to this title contending roster. Not only is he extremely familiar with every player and was a large part in the system that they built, he can take a backseat to Elma who can take that leadership role. Not to say that Mini isn't a good coach in that sense, but relieving him of doing that by giving him a lesser role might unlock more from him if that makes sense. Hopefully he can work well in tandem with Elma and he doesn't step on his toes or get in his space. I know there can definitely be an air of awkwardness if there's another coach that the team is more familiar with that is still around and they might defer to them for situations. A good example of this in real life sports is the Milwaukee Bucks, who have brought in a rookie head coach this year in Adrian Griffin. One of the coaches that was brought in as an assistant coach was Terry Stotts, who was the coach of the Portland Trailblazers for many years and more specifically was the coach of the superstar that the Bucks just traded for, Damian Lillard. There was a situation back in October where Stotts may have overstepped his position as an assistant, causing a verbal altercation and led to him resigning from his position. Whether that's someone with more experience than another or one whose ego can't handle the demotion, there are many ways for a situation like this to fall out. Hopefully that doesn't happen and Fnatic can create a good environment with good rules of engagement, because I would hate to see this team fall apart because of something like that. And that's the video. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you think about all of these roster moves happening in EMEA. What are your thoughts on all of the Apeks boys getting picked up? Do you like Karmine Corp's direction for their rebuild? Do you think BBL did enough to move the needle? I would love to hear what you guys have to say. If you like this video, consider checking out this video right here where I talk about the other moves that have happened so far in EMEA. Stay tuned for another Rostermania video covering some of the moves that I have yet to talk about. Thanks for watching, and until next time, stay hydrated. Peace.